This is Duke University.
Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Shelvis Pons, and I'm a third-year Master of Divinity student here at this wonderful university we call Duke.
And my name is Alex Swain. I'm currently a senior and Duke Student Government President.
We are gathered today to celebrate 50 years of the Black student presence here at Duke. When Duke was founded in 1924, it never outlined an official segregation policy. This lack of policy did not mean that Black men and women were not present at Duke. In fact, Julian Abel, a Philadelphia-based architect, designed this beautiful campus while other Black men and women worked on the massive construction project. Though Black bodies were excluded from admissions and from using certain campus facilities, such as the dining halls, libraries, and residence halls, there was never an explicit policy written to keep them out of these spaces. However, the campus climate adhered to the social and cultural norms of the day, rigidly enforcing racial segregation. In any event, Black people have always provided the labor necessary for the university to function, working as cooks, housekeepers, and maintenance persons. The absence of Black students and faculty at Duke did not go unnoticed. In 1948, a group of Divinity School students petitioned the Divinity School to desegregate. Their petition was the first concerted effort to desegregate the Duke admission policy. In 1955, an editorial in the Duke Chronicle even stated, "Many of us do not understand why this institution is segregated. We should open our doors to all qualified people because we believe in democracy, the principles of Christianity, and the manifestation of the ideals of a university. Segregation is wrong." The following year, the administration received support from the University Council to admit Black students for advanced studies. On March 8, 1961, the Board of Trustees voted to open up graduate and professional schools, making Duke the last major university to formally desegregate. The following year, 4 African American students enrolled in the Divinity, Law, and graduate schools. When they arrived on campus, these new students found the school with segregated restrooms and an entrance and section at Wallace Wade Stadium designated colored. Today, we are honored to have among us some of the brave souls who first enrolled in graduate and professional schools here at Duke. Their strength and academic persistence certainly paved the way for graduate and professional school students like me.
In 1963, the first Black undergraduates enrolled at Duke. At the time, the university had no Black faculty, administrators, or trustees. While a number of Black high school students showed interest in attending Duke, the standards were high and university officials went to great lengths to find the best candidates. Those first Black students at Duke found Duke to be especially challenging. Not only did they have to navigate Duke's rigorous academic climate, they also had to adjust to the social climate. However, many of their peers, faculty, and staff members provided vital support and affirmation to these students. As the years progressed, the number of Black students increased. The university also began to recruit Black faculty members, beginning with political scientist Samuel Du Bois Cook, who came in 1966. Over the next 50 years, those who followed the first graduate and undergraduate students learned, struggled, achieved, and thrived. And this afternoon, we honored the courage of all of those who made this possible. As a Durham native, I am proud to be here today as we recognize that Duke's growing commitment to diversity over the past years has played a part in shaping Durham. Also, let us remember that the first Black students at Duke entered the university at a time of great activism and leadership in Durham, a time when students, employees of the university contributed to the larger struggle for civil rights by working to remedy social justice issues here at Duke. Furthermore, as an undergraduate leader, the stories of the first Black students at Duke inspires me and my fellow student leaders to work for progress at this university. Our commemoration this year is a reminder that our work is not yet done. May the strength of these community members that we honor this afternoon inspire us to work for the future of Duke. May we be inspired to use our talents and our resources to make the Duke community better for all. At this time, we'd like to welcome Mike Bennett, class of 1977, and Vice President of the Duke Alumni Association, to come to the stage.
Thank you, Shelvis and Alexandra. This is really cool. This is really nice. Welcome to all of you. My name is Michael Bennett, and I started 10 years after the first class. 1973 is when I started. This is something that we've been talking about for several years, and I'm extremely excited about this particular commemoration. Just as 50 years ago was historic, I believe this date is historic also. I have two things I wanted to do while I'm up here for my 35 minutes ahead. Don't die, Sterling. Two things. One is I want to put this in context for us all. And two, I want to introduce a 13-minute short film that will give some description as to how life was in '63 and starting for the first. Put it in context. 150 years ago, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves. 50 years ago, the March on Washington, Martin Luther King's March on Washington, and the famous speech, the famous I Have a Dream speech. 50 years ago, Medgar Evers was slain. 50 years ago, five African-American students entered undergrad at Duke University. In 1963, I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. In 1963, I was riding on the back of the bus by law. I was drinking out of colored-only water fountains by law, 2.5 hours down the road. Put this in context. And in 1963, five African-American students entered Duke University. Duke was leaning forward, although it wasn't perfect. Duke was leaning forward in 1963. I had no idea in '63, drinking out of colored-only water fountains, not being able to go to movies like everybody else in Charlotte, North Carolina, that I would have an opportunity to be at this university in 1973, just 10 years later. Put this in context. We are at a point now where 50 years from now, I think people will look back and recognize what a historic point we were at this point. Dick Broadhead and I, 50 years from now, will be here. We'll be both about 65, right, Dick? We'll be a little ready for retirement then, but about 65. So this is something very historic, and so I want to make sure that I had an opportunity to say that, and also to allow all of us to put this in context and to recognize how Duke was leaning forward then and is leaning forward now. With that, I'd like to introduce this short film. Well, let me just say one other thing, too. The culminating event for this 50-year commemoration will be the first weekend in October 3rd through the 6th. So please mark your calendars and be here then. It is going to be an absolutely incredible opportunity and incredible event. Check the website, too, for other outreach, like other regional events that we're going to have in different parts of the country. This film that you're going to see now has been described as a deeply moving 13-minute documentary short featuring firsthand accounts of Duke's integration by some of its first Black students on campus. So with that, roll the film.
To any present member of this community, it's almost inconceivable that Duke ever could have maintained a policy of racial exclusion. But racial discrimination was once the official practice of this school, as it was of the surrounding region and de facto much of this land. The history of racial exclusion is the history Duke set out to reverse with the admission of the first African American undergraduates.
I had gone to the March on Washington. So when I came to campus, it was kind of hitting the reality of what this was without knowing much about it.
A part of it was the sense that this was an obligation, that we were opening the doors. This was my part of the civil rights movement.
We had no earthly idea of what our role or work might amount to.
It was time for a generation to go.
I would never have ever applied to come here. As far as I knew, it was still
Segregated.
Yes.
Yeah.
My father had graduated from Hampton. I thought I was going to be a Hampton pirate, and yet there was this experiment.
The sentiment was overwhelmingly in favor of integration, but it was a little pious, and the feeling was that you let a few students in, that's it.
You had to have an attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And interestingly, most of us came with an attitude. And why is that? Because we were class presidents. Mm-hmm. We were valedictorians.
I was a wide-eyed kid who was fascinated when I looked up at the chapel the first time and saw the spires and said, what in the world am I into? And I didn't see Buddy at the time.
Because he wasn't here.
He wasn't there.
He wasn't here.
And so, as far as I knew, I was it.
My grandmother brought me because my mother had just had twins the week before. And I'd always assumed my mother would take me to college. That did not happen. My grandmother did. She says, I've talked to the women in the dorm, and they will take care of you.
Duke at that time was really a Southern institution.
I was from Durham. Duke was like another whole town away from the town that I had grown up in.
It was a real culture shock.
I was not a fan of Dixie. Dixie was a hallmark of Duke University at its athletic events. And what we began was a process of not standing and shouting, because that was totally out. And it sort of spread through the students, particularly the northern students, because they weren't so attached to that symbol. And you know, the Confederate flag was not your favorite symbol.
I think when we came, the expectation was you couldn't do it. And so people were surprised when you could.
Our experience was much different than the students who came after us,
Even
in
a
a
year
sense,
after.
because we had, there wasn't that nucleus of students to start creating a real community of African American students.
And things were so interesting that I used to keep a bus ticket taped to the bottom drawer of my bureau in the room, because I was prepared to leave.
For me, there was some loneliness, but there was also a tremendous opportunity for leadership and for engagement. And I think it made a difference that we had coordinate colleges, that there was a women's college rather than a co-ed situation when I came in.
When you're a music major, a lot of your time is spent in the practice room. And so there were many things I could say I did not attend. I could say I was not as social as some of my peers?
The focus was on the lab, getting home and back to the lab, and not having this old ragtag car I was driving at the time break down. That was my only concern.
The first semblance of anything was Sam Cooke, who came.
Now, the African-American students were concerned with a number of things, social life. They were concerned about the dances. They wanted a separate dormitory, a separate wing of the dormitory. But this was a conversation, an expression of what they wanted. They were dissatisfied. They had a black student union, they called it, something like that, and which met, I think, on perhaps a weekly basis, I guess, to provide support and so forth. And I remember Steph McCloud and others said they wanted me to identify more closely with the group and so forth. And fine, of course, it's yours. You got my support.
The only other things that we had to hold on to were the people who worked, and they were so happy to see us. You know, the smiles on the faces of the people who worked in the cafeteria or who maintained the dormitories, the women who worked as receptionists and would sit and talk to us, those were the go-to people for us.
We had a very intense and intimate engagement with the Black Durham community. We would sit around and just listen to albums, to the big albums, I guess there would have been the 33s. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. You sit around and listen to it.
We can make the American dream a reality. Everybody must work. Students must work. Faculty members must work. Negroes must work. White people must work. Everybody must get involved in this struggle to get rid of a system that can destroy and is destroying the soul of our nation.
We did not understand why Duke would allow sororities and fraternities to use, at that time, Hope Valley Country Club, which had an openly segregationist membership policy. And so we went to try to talk to President Knight, and he wouldn't talk to us, so we took out books and sat there until he did. We were invisible until we sat down.
There's this extraordinary experience in '68 after Dr. King's assassination, when we have 2,500 students occupying the quadrangle for 4 days and nights in what was called the Vigil. That was a transformative moment at Duke and made possible, I think, a degree of activism that probably had not been here before.
So we started talking with the administration about these things, who listened. To their credit, they listened, but we didn't go anywhere. And so we decided that we would take over the building. We would do it early in the morning. We ran out of the truck, asked the 3 ladies who were in that Allen building to please leave, and that they had our permission to go and call the police. And then we sat. We had some peanut butter and jelly. So finally, into the early afternoon, Ben came to us. Ben Ruffin came and he said, they've acquiesced. They're going to give you what you ask. And for us, you talk about an empowering moment. It was. We were different people when we walked out of that building.
For us, we grew up in a time when African American, we were black. When we were black,
yes,
our teachers cared about it. Well, you
right after Negro,
right? Yeah. But there were people who believed in us and pushed us and said we could do.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the kind of. I think that's what took us through Duke. I think that's took you beyond Duke and to where you were.
Exactly. Exactly.
You came to Duke with a very strong sense of yourself.
Yeah.
And a very, this is what I want to
exactly.
do. And this is what I'm going to do.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to pay attention to all of these peripheral things.
I think that says it.
I think those days showed how a university could be responsive to a level of moral concern which hadn't been visible ever before.
Essentially what happened by our efforts and by our presence and our efforts is that in effect, Duke was opened up from being a good regional institution to a world-class university.
I think we are at a position in the long evolution of the African American Studies program where we can claim, you know, some real accomplishment and distinction nationally.
Duke is I think a much better place. Some people look back and say, oh, there's this and that, but Duke is a much better institution now than it was back then. It was a good institution then.
I've told a number of different presidents that Duke is a really, really good school. It's not great yet. And it will not be great until the measure of the same is parsed out to everybody.
50 years ago, Duke made a commitment, and in the whole history of the 20th century, the change we're about to celebrate is rivaled by only 2 others for its impact on what Duke has become. Without the move to Durham from Randolph County in 1892, this school would have been nowhere and would probably have failed. Without the transformational gift from James B. Duke in 1924, we would still be a distinguished regional liberal arts college, and without the repeal of racial exclusion policies, this would not be the place where the brightest minds come from every origin to deepen and expand our knowledge of our world. Let's be proud of Duke's remarkable progress, and let's be resolved to speed this progress on.
My name is Hardy Vier, and I had the pleasure of graduating with the class of 1993. That's right. I remember vividly in my senior year standing on the quad with a group of fellow African American students and participating in the Black Faculty Initiative, an effort to have more black faculty join our ranks here at that university. And although then I did not fully appreciate it, I am now incredibly aware that my ability to stand on that quad that day and make those arguments that I did, it's directly linked to the women and men that opened the doors for us in the 60s. And so to all those women and men who I have the pleasure of introducing today, I personally want to say thank you. So these African American pioneers are a remarkable group of women and men who were the first black undergraduate and graduate students to matriculate at our alma mater. I like saying that. Yet they are more than just a collection of people who, by circumstance of history, timing, and grit, found themselves breaking the color barrier at Duke. They made a lasting impression on members of the Duke community while they were here, and have gone to make substantial contributions in their personal and professional lives. I'll begin with the members of the undergraduate class of 1967. Mary Mitchell Harris. Mary Mitchell Harris grew up in Durham, where both of her parents worked for American Tobacco. She was valedictorian of her senior class at Hillside High School and pre-med throughout her time here at Duke. Her professional career was dedicated to the field of education. Although Mary died in 2002, She is represented here today by more than 30 members of her immediate and extended family. Would the family of Mary Mitchell Harris please stand? We thank each of you for being here today with us. Gene Kendall. Gene grew up in Greensboro and was admitted to Duke with a full scholarship. He left Duke after his sophomore year, transferring to the University of Kansas, where he earned his undergraduate and graduate degrees in engineering. He served in the United States Navy proudly for 35 years, rising to the rank of Rear Admiral. Amen. In 1992, he became director of the United States Naval Academy's Division of Mathematics and Science and became the first African American and first non-Naval Academy graduate to lead a major academic division. Admiral, would you please stand? Wilhelmina Reuben Cook, also known as Mimi. Mimi was encouraged to apply to Duke by her father, Odell Reuben, who was earning his PhD from Duke's Divinity School, when he learned that Duke had voted to admit black undergraduates. Her professional career has included a number of academic and senior administration appointments. She's currently a professor at the University of the District of Columbia's David A. Clark School of Law. She is an emerita member of Duke's Board of Trustees and was the 2011 winner of the highest award presented by the Alumni Association, its Distinguished Alumni Award, and well earned. Mimi, will you please stand? Cassandra Smith Rush. Cassandra first applied to Duke when she was a high school junior at St. Anne's Academy in Winston-Salem. She was denied, but the following year, when the university voted to admit black undergraduates, she applied once again and was accepted. She became active in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, and was arrested along with her fellow CORE members during a sit-in protest in Chapel Hill in 1964. She left Duke at the end of the first semester of her junior year and went on to work in Washington, D.C. for the federal government and later the Navy. Cassandra earned her bachelor's degree in economics from Philadelphia's Chestnut Hill College, and that was in 1979. She also worked for Southern New England Telephone in New Haven, Connecticut, and although Cassandra passed in 1996, she is represented today by 8 members of her immediate and extended family. Would Cassandra's family please rise? Nathaniel Be White Jr., a native of Durham, where he attended Hillside High School with Mary Mitchell Harris. After Duke, Nate earned a Master's of Philosophy in Mathematical Statistics and Probability from George Washington University. He has a wide range of professional experience in strategic planning, statistical analysis, research design and evaluation, and community economic development. He is principal of the Formation Consulting Group and past president of the Hayti Development Corporation. Nate, would you please rise? Now turning to our graduate and professional school, Donna Allen Harris. Donna was the first African American to enter Duke University's School of Nursing in 1967, earning her Bachelor's of Science of Nursing degree in 1971. After graduating from Duke, she went on to practice nursing in a variety of agencies and institutions. She is currently a clinical research nurse at Duke Schools of Nursing, and in 2011 receive the school's Trailblazer Award. Donna, would you please stand? W. Delano Merriweather was the first black student to enroll at Duke Medical School in 1963, earning his MD degree and graduating with honors in 1967. A hematologist and oncologist, he has held appointments at a number of academic and government agencies, including the National Cancer Institute, the National Institute of Health, Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, and the United States Public Health Service. An accomplished athlete, he won the AAU Outdoor and Indoor Track and Field Championships in 1971 and again in 1972, and was a top contender for the 1972 United States Olympic team as a 100-meter sprinter. He is currently an emergency room physician and works on efforts to improve human rights and access to healthcare services in Africa. Dr. Merriweather, would you please rise? Ida Stephens Owens. Ida was the first black student to earn a PhD from the Duke Graduate School. She earned it in physiology in 1967. In 1975, while working at a developmental pharmacology lab in the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, Dr. Owens initiated a research program that is now recognized for its studies on the genetics of human diseases. She currently holds the section on genetic disorders of drug metabolism in the program on developmental endocrinology and genetics, and she has been recognized throughout the world for her work on drug detoxifying enzymes. Dr. Owens, would you please rise? Anthony Oyewole. Anthony was the first African student to enroll at Duke as an undergraduate, transferring from a Nigerian school in the fall of 1964. He went on to earn his undergraduate degree in 1966, his master's in 1968, and his PhD in 1970. He has been professor and head of political science departments at North Carolina Central University and in Nigeria's Obafemi Awolowo University and Bennett College in Greensboro. Professor Oyewole could not be with us today as he's currently living and teaching in Nigeria, but he's certainly with us in spirit. David Robinson II. David was one of the first two African Americans to earn law degrees from Duke, earning his law degree in 1964, a Phi Beta Kappa and magna cum laude graduate of Howard University. David worked for the Federal Reserve after law school. He then went on to work for Xerox, where he rose to the position of Assistant General Counsel. After retiring from Xerox in 1988, he moved to Florida and became the first General Counsel to the 11th Judicial Circuit of Florida. He is a former member of the Duke Law Board of Visitors. David, would you please stand? Jean Spalding. Jean was the first African-American woman to graduate from the Duke University School of Medicine in 1972. She also completed her residency and fellowship in psychiatry at Duke. She served on Duke's Board of Trustees, the Duke Health System Board of Directors, the Durham Hospital Corporation Board of Trustees, and as Duke's Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs. She is a trustee of the Duke Endowment and a director of Cardinal Health Corporation and maintains a private psychiatry practice in Durham. Dr. Spalding, will you please stand? Katherine Gibson Taylor. Katherine graduated from Johnson C. Smith University and had already been teaching high school English for 15 years when she became the first African-American student to enroll in Duke's Masters of Teaching program. She earned her degree in 1967, taught English and later journalism for 34 years. She has held leadership positions on the Wilson County, North Carolina School Board, her local chapter of the Democratic Party, and the local and national chapters of Delta Sigma Theta. Katherine, will you please stand? Matthew Zimmerman. Matthew was one of the first 2 African-American students to officially enroll at Duke Divinity School, earning his Master's of Divinity in 1965. He was ordained in the National Baptist Convention and worked for several years in academic communities as a campus minister. He began his service in the United States Army in 1967 as a captain and chaplain. He was the first African-American to serve as the United States Army's Chief of Chaplains and as Director of Chaplain Services for the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, rising to the rank of general. Unfortunately, Chaplain Zimmerman cannot be with us today, but he too is with us in spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving all of our special guests a well-deserved round of applause. Now that's context. As Mike said earlier, this event is one of many taking place in conjunction with a 50th commemoration celebration. We encourage each of you to visit our website and also to look at your reunions packet for those of you back for your Duke reunion this weekend, and that has more information about our year-long commemoration. You can also share your own memories and experience on Facebook, for those of us on Facebook. That page is Black History at Duke. And for those of you on Twitter, not me, there was a special hashtag that you could use. Yes, I am a Luddite. And that hashtag is #DukeFiftieth, #DukeFiftieth. And please use that in commenting on today's program. A number of us have worked on this effort, and it has been a labor of love. And thank you again for joining us today. And now I turn the floor over to our president, Richard Broadhead.
My friends, I welcome you all to this great day. I'm particularly grateful for the fact that many of you were all set to come when we scheduled this event in January before the harsh winter weather made that not work out. But you know, we were worried we couldn't ever get everybody together again, but somehow we did it. I'm very happy because it means so much to this university. Indeed, this is a day of the first significance in the history of this university, and I think we're all getting that feeling as we watch these things. I said something on the video, but I just want to make the point again. This university was not on some inevitable trajectory of progress that led from one place to another. This is a university that only became what it is because of acts of crisis and transformation, acts of true change in its self-definition. This was a little rural school about to fold in bankruptcy when it chose to close and reopen in Durham, North Carolina. This was a little liberal arts college and still would be, except it chose to become instead a full comprehensive research university. And I have said, and I would maintain it, the only comparable act of equal significance in defining the history of this university is that in the early 60s, this place chose no longer to be a place that excluded students on grounds of race, and chose instead to be a school that welcomed people on only one ground, the ground of ability and the ground of character. And this is the basis of every growth Duke has made in the last 50 years. That act made us what we are now. It made it a place that's defined by equal access, equal opportunity, and not only that, it makes it a school where everybody who comes here gets the benefit of the change that was made in the early 60s. Everybody benefits from being a student at a university where all the most talented people of every human community can come together, stimulate each other, challenge each other, and educate each other, and lead each other forward. If Duke had not made this change in the early 1960s, we would no longer be a distinguished regional academy. We would have closed because no student in their right mind, white, black, or any other origin, would have wanted to go to a segregated academy. You know, it was the beginning of the great chapter in Duke's growth. Now, I'm so glad to Shelvis for giving us a little of the prehistory, because the history of the event we celebrate today did not begin 50 years ago. It began as long ago as you can go back. When the people of Trinity College decided to move to Durham, they chose to move this college to the town of the Black Wall Street. You know, they chose as its home a place that was defined by its vibrant black culture. We know that the place was built on designs by a black architect. You know that John Hope Franklin, though he was excluded from the faculty, did the research for what remains probably the single most important work of African American history in the 20th century, From Slavery to Freedom, was partly done in Perkins Library by somebody who taught at NC Central because he was not free to be on our faculty. Later he was. So there's no all-white history of this university. This was a white and black university from the beginning. It's just that it pretended it wasn't and actually enforced that policy in the grounds of admission. And what did it take to make it finally change? Well, and I'm also glad that you talked about the Divinity School. I take my hat off to the Divinity School. 1948, that's a lot of years before the year we're celebrating that agitation started in the part of students and faculty of this university. It took struggle, it took struggle, it took struggle, but then it took two other things. It took Duke University to resolve to open the doors. And then it took something else. It took actual young men and women to walk through those opened doors. And it seems to me that's what's so inspiring for us when we stand here and when we hear these names called and we see you stand up, to think, let's go back through the time machine. 50 years ago, you were the young lad, you were the young lady who was the person who walked through the open door. And you had to do things that people haven't had to do anymore because you were the first one through there. You had to represent the whole promise of your race in this place. You had to succeed. You had to create new patterns. Not only that, the whole point is when Duke integrated, it did not add 5 black students to a school that stayed the same, whether it knew it or not. When this place integrated, it transformed itself. And so the students who walked through the open door had to be willing to be the agents of transformation. And now we are happy to say we are on the far side of those transformations and we are their beneficiaries. Through your pioneering work and through the work of many from that day to this is a place with a very different history from the history of Duke in 1960. This is a school whose undergraduate school is ranked in the top 10 in the country, that has regularly had the highest number of African American students of any elected, highly selective university in the United States. This is a top 5 or 6 medical school that has regularly had, by significant measure, the highest number of minority students in its very selective student body. This is a university whose most recent head of our Alumni Association has been Hardy Vieux. Why not? Who could be more perfect? But you probably wouldn't have been chosen in 1957. This is a university who the last head of whose board of trustees was Dan Blue, who, as you know, was the Speaker of the House of our state legislature and a graduate of our law school. This is a place, the dean of whose graduate school you saw up on the screen a few minutes ago, Paula McLean, professor of political science. Why would this surprise anybody? If you're going to choose the best talent, sometimes it would be white people, sometimes it would be black people. The talent has been trained, and now the talent is available to us. Who is the new chaplain, the new dean of Duke Chapel, Luke Powery? And it goes on and on and on. Most proud to me, we take pride in this accomplishment. It has made us what we are able to be today. But I'd have to say the great meaning of this is the point wasn't to allow 5 students to be the first students. That wasn't the purpose. It wasn't even to have other people come in their wake. It was to have people get the education here that enabled them to give significant lives to our society. And as I listened to the biographies of the people who were the first graduates in all the different schools, I just swell with pride. Pardon me if I say it. I swell with pride when I think that each of you has gone on to such a significant and varied life. Our country is the better for the talent we have educated here. And I want now to introduce somebody who can be an example to us of the way when you open the doors to talent and you train talent, you unleash talent to do its important work for our society. It's now my pleasure to introduce a Duke alum of the class of 1991. I call him William Maurice Cowan. I'm probably the first person who's called him William in a very long time. He's universally known as Mo Cowan. He is the newest senator of the United States, a black graduate of this university in the year 1991. Mo Cowan came to Duke from Yadkinville. That was probably a bit of a journey, even so many years after this, this thing we're celebrating had begun. You came to Duke from Yadkinville, you graduated in '91, you went on to law school and got your law degree at Northeastern University, and then you went and worked in a law firm and quickly became a partner, and you are well known around the Northeastern United States for mentoring other people trying to get their starts in legal careers. When Deval Patrick was elected governor, he called on you, and this is a moment I love. You'd made a private success, and you know, I'm sure you paid a little price to put that aside to step forward and do the public work, the social service that you undertook. Mo Cowan became the legal counsel to Governor Patrick, and then he became his chief of staff. And when John Kerry stepped down in January of this year to be named Secretary of State, Governor Patrick, in a widely hailed move, chose Mo Cowan to be the newest senator from Massachusetts. Now, now I thank you, my friends, who were the first ones to walk through the open door, for creating the world in which a person like this is a pretty ordinary, average product of this university. I would only say one thing. In preparing to introduce you, I learned something I did not know. I knew that there had only been 8 African-American senators, but I did not know that until you were named, there never had been 2 sitting at the same time. Go back from Duke and tell that institution they need to do some work. We've made a lot more progress than they have here. It is now my pleasure to introduce Senator Mo Cowan.
Well, hello. I'm going to spend a little time up here. Get comfortable. First of all, thank you, President Broadhead, for that kind introduction and the welcome homecoming. And greetings to all those of you back for your Alumni Weekend. Special greetings to the class of 1993 who was here when I was here. Good to see you all. Some of you, I think, may owe me some money. President Broadhead talked about this event originally being scheduled in January, which was actually a great reminder. And as we come here today to celebrate those first 5, as I'll refer to them too, I'm going to take for a minute to acknowledge the big 3 who helped me get here. That is to say, the 3 black men who together in their collective works got me to the stage today. Of course, it's President Barack Obama, who nominated John Kerry to be Secretary of State. Thank you. Creating a vacancy that was that Deval Patrick, the governor of Massachusetts, who was so kind to fill it with me. And of course, the third black man is God Almighty himself, who gave that bad weather in January. And gave those other 2 time to let me become a senator. So, my family and I are honored to be back on campus after all these years. And before I get too deep in my remarks, if you'll indulge me further, I'd like to acknowledge my family who are here with me today. My lovely wife, Stacy, my older sister, Felicia, and her husband, Rory,
my cousin, who's more like my brother, Damon Martin, and of course, my beloved mother, Cynthia. They're down front, they're a little shy. Stacy and I have two boys, Miles and Grant. They're not here with us today. They're up in Boston area with their grandparents. But fret not. I fully expect them to be here in the autumns of 2022, 2026. For my wife, today very well may mark the first occasion actually for her to hear me discuss my beloved alma mater without talking about basketball. For my mother, this is an occasion to decide whether her hard-earned dollars paying for my tuition were well spent. And on this day of commemoration, we talk about the first five. I want to talk about the first one in my life for a moment, if you would. And I'm going to ask you on this special day if you join me in saluting my mother, because today is her blessed birthday. And if I know my mom like I know my mom, tomorrow morning at church, there's a pretty fair chance she's going to describe to everybody how her baby boy got all you to come in here and celebrate her birthday. So I want to thank you for that. Since I last roamed these grounds over 20-plus years ago, the campus has transformed physically in so many ways. The Bryan Center has undergone renovation. There are academic buildings, residence halls, dining facilities today where parking lots stood then. And, as I recently learned, there's a certain bench gifted by the graduating class of 1948, not quite what it used to be. But I will say more about that later. I was honored to be invited back to campus for Alumni Weekend and to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Duke's integration of the undergraduate schools and honor the first five. The first five undergraduates who paved the way for so many in this auditorium to attend this fine institution. And I am humbled to share the stage in this occasion with these trailblazers and the families of those first five members who are not with us anymore, but whose legacy endures. We are here today to commemorate and honor that legacy, their conviction, and their courage to learn that brought them to this place half a century ago. And we are here to recognize the remarkable progress that our university and our nation has made in these past 50 years. Duke will take the whole of this year to honor the first five and most appropriately reflect on the first 50 years of integration. And the nation will take time to commemorate the other seminal events of 1963. As you've heard from President Broadhead already, a year described as one of the three most significant in the lifeline of this university. I want to spend my time today offering some of my own reflections of the university's evolution during that period, including my 4 years on campus, before addressing what I believe is one of the greatest challenges confronting all of us in the coming years, a challenge that must be overcome, like segregation, if we want all citizens to have a shot at prosperity. But before we can properly consider where we have yet to go, we must remember where we have been. 50 years ago, in the autumn of 1963, when Wilhelmina Rubin, Mary Mitchell Harris, Jean Kendall, Cassandra Smith Rush, and Nathaniel White Jr. stepped on this campus, they did so late in a year that was not only one of the most significant in the lifeline of Duke, but one of the most significant years in our nation's history. At that time, nearly a decade after the NAACP in Topeka, Kansas, Thurgood Marshall and others had convinced the Supreme Court that separate could never be equal or morally just, segregation remained the practice in too many of our institutions, especially our educational institutions. Our first five were high school seniors at the time, preparing to break down barriers in this very place, and preparing to do so at a time and in a region of this country where so-called leaders proudly proclaimed segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Our first five, all Southerners, watched the South become ground zero for the civil rights struggle, a struggle that saw peaceful and nonviolent actions in support of equality and justice met with brutal violence, hateful vitriol, and shameful indifference by white public leaders. If you were one of the first 5, or of their generation, among your senior year memories of personal accomplishment and eager anticipation of lives not yet lived were indelible images and observations that no doubt shaped your impressions of the wider world laying before you. Demonstrations for equality and justice by Black Americans and Americans of all stripes. These demonstrators met by the likes of Bull Connor, his fire hoses, and his dogs. Martin Luther King Jr. speaking truth to power in a letter from a Birmingham jail. The killing of Medgar Evers hours after President John F. Kennedy called for civil rights legislation. And the killing of President Kennedy himself before Congress had the courage to act. 4 little black girls killed in the bombing of Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church. And, of course, thousands marching on Washington for jobs and freedom, all in 1963. And that year, as our first 5 prepared to break the Duke undergraduate color barrier, they may have felt some solidarity with Vivian Malone, James Hood, Harvey Gantt, James Meredith, and others unnamed who, like them, were braving the fight and blazing trails across college campuses all across the South. They soon would begin the often hard and isolated work of being among the first dreamers to forge pathways toward reality. Soon they would begin their own journey of academic, personal, and social exploration that would lead each of them to their own measures of success and pave the way for thousands of Duke undergraduates of all race, creed, and origin to cross the threshold in their footsteps. I was one of those students. As you've heard, I grew up about 100 miles west of here, not one generation removed from the civil rights movement, yet seemingly a world away from Duke. My world was supposed to be different from the one that the first 5 and my parents knew. And in many significant ways, it was. By law, of course, Jim Crow was dead, and separate and equal was a thing of the past. I attended integrated public schools, and 2 of my best friends in school were white. But as soon as the last bell rang, my white friends and I parted ways into seemingly different worlds within the same community. Long after the Greensboro sit-ins, my rural hometown was still largely segregated in the way we lived our lives. My friend's family never interacted with mine, and we rarely saw each other outside the classroom or playground. And even school itself remained segregated, albeit in a slightly different way. I was placed on an advanced track from an early age, and until I reached the 9th grade, true story, I do not recall having a class with another black student. Of course, I do not need to tell you, far too many of the other black kids in my school were placed on a different track, a track that would limit their opportunities even as mine expanded. Yet my so-called advanced track provided me little in the way of an education about the rich role of black people in the complicated history of this great nation. My school may have been many years integrated, but it seemed that the authors of our history books didn't get the memo. Thank goodness for Crispus Attucks, George Washington Carver, W.E.B. Du Bois, Dr. King, and just a few others, for they were about the only black folks we ever talked about. So in a very real sense, I found myself segregated within that otherwise integrated system. As my high school graduation approached, and I prepared to be the first from my immediate family to attend a 4-year college, I sought an education that would lead me, I believe, to medical school to fulfill what I thought was my dream of becoming a doctor. I was accepted at Duke, and I must admit, I immediately ended a childish affinity with a certain lighter colored blue just down the street. And I arrived here in 1987, 20 years after the first 5 had moved on. That dream I mentioned of becoming a doctor, by the way, I must admit, ended abruptly on Science Drive. It was in the late Dr. Bonk's freshman chemistry class. In hindsight, I I realized that I also sought an environment for college where I could learn the things about my own history through my interaction with many who shared that history but knew it better than me. My years right here at Duke provided me all I sought. Thanks in no small part to the First Five and the recruiting and lobbying efforts of Joby Branyon in the Office of Admissions and the intoxicating allure of Black Student Weekend. Duke in the late 1980s, you know what I'm talking about. Yes, you all, many of us were party to it later on. Duke in the late 1980s had a growing Black student population. For the first time, I met Black students from the Northeast, the Midwest, the West Coast, the Mississippi Delta, and everywhere in between, including places I'm not sure most of us could find on a map, such as Blackville, South Carolina, and Soddy Daisy, Tennessee. You know, that's saying a lot, because I come from Yadkinville. I also came to know many of the Black folks from Durham and the surrounding towns who knew Duke not as their home away from home, but as their workplace. All these folks, students, faculty, and staff alike, introduced me to perspectives on Black identity, personalities, and culture that I simply had never been exposed to in my rural North Carolina town. I loved learning about African Americans who improved on Edison's incandescent light bulb, invented the traffic signal and the gas mask, founded historically Black colleges and universities, and surveyed the land that became our nation's capital, and yes, designed this beloved campus and these iconic buildings that surround us today. And of course, I loved exploring the history and the people in the great city of Durham. But my life was forever transformed and altered when I found out there was something called house music and go-go. And so much of this happened at that simple bench gifted by the class of 1948 I mentioned earlier. In my days on campus, and for so many I know in this auditorium today, in the days before Twitter, Facebook, smartphones, and even email, that bench was the single greatest social networking device available to Black students on campus. Like the barbershops and beauty salons and church basements back in our neighborhoods, the class of 48 bench is where we would gather to make plans, occasionally share some class notes, hear the latest news and gossip, which of course then became news. And it was said that if you stood near that bench long enough, every Black student at this school would eventually come by. That gathering spot, and so many more like it, the Mary Lou. It's the Mary Lou Williams Cultural Center, but we called it the Mary Lou. The student locator desk. Moment of silence, rest in peace for Johnny Little. The Central Campus apartments. These were available ports should a storm ever arise in the Black experience here at Duke. I can only imagine for those first five how often they needed a port and looked to each other in the midst of storms. The class of 48 bench was where we gathered to share, care, learn, grow, and heal as a community within this community. Oh, the things about Black college life I learned there, and life in general. They could fill volumes and curl my mother's toes. Of course, when I was here as a student, if you'd asked me directions to the class of 48 bench, I would have been of little use to you. Wouldn't have known where it was. But if you asked me where to find the bench by its more recognizable name, the Black bench, I could get you there from any spot on campus. I had the pleasure of recently talking with an undergrad, and I asked her about the bench. She seemed somewhat confused, and she told me that the Black bench is no more. It grew controversial over the years. I understand that, but I must freely admit, that's unfortunate, in my opinion. The gatherings and conversations at that bench led to many transformative experiences for so many students, certainly me. this place transformed me. And I have no doubt that it transformed so many others in this room, just as it did our first five. And so many of us are beholden to the first five, and all those, including our graduate students, first themselves, who came before and methodically tore down barriers of inequality through their word and deed. Over the decades, members of that community stood forward to demand that this campus be more representative of its own ideals, and the university responded, not always with ease and grace, but they responded and they evolved into the great institution it is today. Duke has done well in this evolution, but neither the university nor we should feel that the work is complete. Events like today provide us with an opportunity to engage in discussion about where we are and where we still need to go. So where is Duke today with respect to all of this? Is the university and her citizenry evolved to the point where they should be in matters of race relations and access to education? How should the university community, students, faculty, administrators alike, respond when academic research questions, when academic research questions the qualification or preparation of minority students? And what does it say about Duke's evolution that a few student groups still throw parties with offensive racial and ethnic themes? And what is the deal with Black Student Weekend? I know you call it something else now, but for those of my generation, it's always going to be BSW. Are we where we should be as a university community? I submit that we are. Let me explain. We are here today at a place and a time where we are able to debate those very questions, and so many more, honestly and openly. Something I suspect was not the case for our first five. The Duke community can cogitate on the meaning of these questions, their origin, and engage each other in the never-ending quest to find enlightenment and understanding. I suspect that wasn't available to the first five. I bet they would tell us that we fail only when we choose not to engage each other on these matters and when the university doesn't allow space for disagreement and debate. As President Broadhead said, where there is work still to do, we should acknowledge it frankly and keep at our task. At a similar tribute 20 years ago, celebrating 30-year anniversary for our first five, Leonard Beckham, who then served as the university vice president and vice provost, challenged the Duke community to look upon this day as, quote, not merely a self-congratulatory event, but as an opportunity to pause, to evaluate the successes and accomplishments of the past, and to envision the future. That's the task ahead for us. I would like to think that Dr. Beckham, who now teaches on the West Coast, meant that the future, when he said those words, meant not just the future for Duke, but for the wider community as a whole. In 1963, when those five young undergraduates broke through the vestiges of discrimination and prejudice to come here and acquire a world-class education, they opened the doors for so many to follow. I walked through those doors. You walked through those doors. We had the chance to walk through those doors. And yet, while we have overcome many hurdles born of segregation, millions of children in our country still lack the opportunity and access to the kind of education they deserve, we received, and they need. The situation for our nation's minority, immigrant, and poorer residents is particularly dire. Too many students of color, especially in our cities, lack the access to the quality education they need to thrive in today's society and in today's economy. They can't get the kind of education the first five not only got here, but had before they stepped foot on this campus. As upper-class suburban schools continue to accelerate, our nation's poorest schools, most often those that serve the minority and immigrant populations, stagnate. The result, an achievement gap. It's widening every year as students of color still have lower academic achievement, still score lower academically, and on standardized tests continue to fall below the average in comparison to their white counterparts. At this point in our history, I'm sad to say, still 1 in 4 African Americans will not graduate from high school like our first 5 did and have the chance to follow in their footsteps. And less than 15% will earn a college degree that I had the chance to earn because of the efforts and the trailblazing of the first 5. The uphill climb for these children is steep, and it will only get steeper. A recent Duke graduate, volunteering with Teach for America in Harlem, described her 9th grade class, where the mean age is 17, and most students have the vocabulary and math skills of 6th graders. Without an adequate educational foundation and the tools these young people need to thrive in our public schools, what hope can they have to achieve even a high school diploma? And what hope do we have that we are building a better society? And even for those children who dream and have the opportunity for a college education, they're going to face ever-rising higher education costs. Over the last 30 years, the cost of college has risen faster than the price of food, consumer goods, and medical expenses. And I don't need to tell you that medical expenses are awfully high. Since 1980, tuition increases have risen at a meteoric 1,120%. In today's knowledge-based economy, the key to success is a quality education that adequately prepares students to compete in a complex global marketplace. Academic preparation is directly tied to financial stability. Over a lifetime, a college graduate, like our first 5, will earn almost $1 million more than their counterpart with just a high school degree. And for those without a high school degree or a GED, the path to prosperity is even more bleak. Every child in this country, regardless of the color of their skin or where they grew up or what their household income may be, deserves an equal opportunity at the fundamental promise of a good education like our first 5 received. Our governments from local city halls yes, to the halls of Congress, must commit to identifying the failing schools and allocating the necessary resources so that every student in every state gets the world-class education that we are obligated to provide. We must address the cost of higher education before a generation of students is crushed under the weight of financial debt or altogether denied the dream pursued by our first 5. Federal loan and grant programs have alleviated some of this burden for millions of students, but we must protect these tools and make the dream of higher education possible for those who can least afford to lose it. We must renew our commitment to investing in education and opportunity for the youngest among us so that they too can walk in the footsteps of our first 5. We can tackle this challenge and we can close this achievement gap. And as we learned from 1963, only an impassioned citizenry can serve as a catalyst for change. The sooner we recognize our shortcomings and demand action, the sooner we will make 2013 the tipping point for education equality, just as the first 5 and their generation did in 1963 for equality and justice for all. To meet and overcome our nation's challenges, we require an involved and engaged population. Each of us must assume an active role to ensure a successful future for our children and our country. Wilhelmina, Nathaniel, and Jean know exactly what I'm talking about. Each of them chose different careers after their time at Duke, but each of them maintained the common link and thread of their lives to improve the lives of others on this campus and after they left these hallowed halls. They committed to giving back. For Wilhelmina, it was her work as a professor, passing along the gift of education to the next generation. And I'm going to pause for a second to acknowledge she also married a pretty fine fellow who became my law partner, Mr. Ed Cook. For Nathaniel, it was his efforts in redeveloping his own neighborhood right here in Durham, where we live, where we work, where we prosper, to ensure a brighter future for the children growing up just as he had. And for Jean, you've heard it. He answered a higher calling of service to his country, not just to serve actively, but then to serve in educating and building another generation of leaders. They showed the determination and commitment to follow in the footsteps so that others could follow in their footsteps. Like the first five, and all of us who followed them on campus, we must demand progress. But more importantly, when it comes to educational quality, we must be part of the change we seek. In 1964, as you saw when the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. stood on this very stage, he put forth a clarion call for equality and justice. I imagine some or perhaps all of our first five might have been here that day, prepared to heed the call. I guess what I'm asking in my remarks as we reflect on the first five is for you to heed my call, to help level the playing field for our kids today and the kids for generations to come. In this very hall, 49 years ago, Dr. King reminded us that human progress never rolls through on the wheels of an inevitability. It comes through on the tireless efforts and consistent work of dedicated individuals. It is necessary to recognize that the time is always right to do right. For Duke University, that time was 1963, and it brought us the first five. For us, the time is now to ensure that future generations and many more will have the opportunity to follow the pathway blazed by the first five, our trailblazers. Thank you.
I have a final remark or two. My first one is addressed to the senator's mother. You're already having a pretty happy birthday, aren't you? If you're the mother of that person, you must have more than one happy day. This is, you did great work. And I'd have to say, if I were one of the first five, or since we now know that the first five are about the first 20, and thank you, Hardy, for reading the whole honor roll, if I were one of you, I'd be pretty proud if I listened to this guy too, because I'd say I helped start the parade that this person came marching along in afterward. And you know, and then I look to the two students who started today, and I like to think 20 years from now they'll be senators or you know, who admirals. Who knows what you're going to be? Alex, I expect you'll be an admiral. You'll have you come back, and then you'll be the examples. You know, because it all goes forward. And I just would say it's so meaningful to us to observe the beginning of a change that we all know is not over. It's not over for this university. It was the beginning. It was not the end of things. It was the beginning of the work to create a better university, and then beyond the university for a better world. Because we all know we could make Duke as nice as can be, but it still is in a world that needs intelligent people to feel the obligation to go use their intelligence to make the world that will be better for us all. My thanks to our distinguished and honored guests. My thanks to you, Senator Cowan, and my thanks to all. I hope you will step over to the Great Hall for a little reception, but what a great day this has been. Thank you so much.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.